Oh, there we go, the microphone's on. Thought my projection wasn't really working there. Hello everyone, it's great to see you all here today. Welcome to the 2024 ALPS conference. I'm Jamie Humphrey, I'm the chair of ALPS. I'm also head of journals at the Royal Society of Chemistry. I'm delighted to welcome you all here today for our conference. That welcome extends, of course, to everyone here in Manchester and also to those delegates who have joined us online. Community is really important to us as an organisation at ALPS. It's the bedrock of what we're here for, and it's at the heart of our strategy. And the ALPS community is a very broad one. It covers many different organisations, different types of organisations, whether they're classic publishers or newer organisations moving into this profession. And ALPS is a home for all of those groups. This conference is a chance for members from our diverse community to come together and hear about the latest developments in our industry, discuss issues that we're facing, and share ideas and experiences. And to help with this, we have the Attendee Hub event app. You may have downloaded that on your phones already. If you haven't, you would have received information on how to access the app in your registration information, but always, and I'll say this a few times throughout my brief welcome, go to the registration desk because the ALPS team there will have all the answers to any questions you might have to ask. No pressure there. We do want everyone to feel welcome at our conference, and I think we all know that if this is your first time at a conference, at the ALPS conference, and you might not know many people here, it can be very challenging. So I'd urge all of us, when we're at networking events, if you see someone who maybe isn't engaged, maybe is on their own, do reach out, extend a hand of friendship and involve them in discussions. As I say, community is at the heart of what ALPS is here for, and so it's in doing these things that we build our community. I'm going to start moving on now to some thank yous. I want to say a really big thank you to Lou Peck at the front here, and the Conference Programme Committee for putting together an incredible programme for this year's conference. It looks really exciting. I'm really looking forward to the next few days, and I know all of you are. I'd also like to say thank you, while I'm doing thank yous, to all the speakers and session chairs in advance. We're all looking forward to the next few days. I want to thank all our sponsors and exhibitors. We wouldn't really be able to have our conference without their support, and it's great to see this support coming from members of our community. And so just to run through in order, I'm going to call them out by name. We have our Platinum sponsor and the sponsor of our Rising Stars Award, the PLS. We have the sponsor of our awards, which is PA Editorial. We have our Silver sponsors, Clarivate, Carga, MDPI, MPS and Silverchair. And our Bronze sponsors, Aries, Convey, Delta Think, Knowledge Works Global Limited, Creadox, QDOS, Scholastica and the London Book Fair. And I also want to give a shout out to the International Bunch for their contribution towards the expenses for our speaker this afternoon. Before I hand over to Tom to introduce our keynote, I do have some housekeeping things I need to go through. So first, and importantly, I would ask all of us to be familiar and mindful of our code of conduct. As I say, ALPS is about community, so please be mindful of how we treat each other, please be respectful, and please be kind. Other things to point out, all of our sessions will be in this room, which is Deansgate 1 and 2, or next door, which is Deansgate 3. Coffee, tea, and refreshments are served in the foyer. You would have walked through there to come in here. And lunch is in the Podium restaurant on the ground floor. If you haven't already been there, you would have passed there on the way to the registration desk. All of the sessions are being live streamed and will be recorded for use on various platforms, including the ALPS website. So please avoid making any comments or criticisms which relate to a named individual or organisation. We do have an official photographer, who I think I've seen already around today, who will be taking photos. If you have any concerns about this, maybe you don't want your photo used in this way, please do contact the ALPS desk and the ALPS team and talk to them there. there are no fire drills planned over the next few days, so if you do hear a fire alarm, move to your nearest exit. There are some signs here. I won't do the air hostess thing, done too many times, but you get the idea. Leave in an ordered manner to the nearest exit. There is Wi-Fi available. If you haven't worked out to use it already, details can be found by the registration desk or in the event app. And if you are wanting to update your socials, then please use the hashtag ALPS2024. Toilets, it's quite detailed, these housekeeping notes. Toilets can be found just outside in the coffee area to the right-hand side of the bar, and there are toilets or loos downstairs as well by the restaurant. Smoking is not permitted in the bedrooms or anywhere in the hotel, but there are designated areas outside the main entrance to the hotel. Again, you would have passed that when you came in, if you want to go out and have a smoke. And then in general, I would say if you need any help or any advice, please ask a member of the ALPS team who will be wearing these rather fetching gold lanyards. I have promised I need to return this to the ALPS team because they're a rare commodity. Or you might want to talk to an ALPS director, so there's a few of us around wearing our red ribbons there. And if anyone at any time throughout the conference would like access to a quiet space, these are available. Please ask at the hotel reception. We'll be very happy to assist you with that. So that's all my housekeeping done. That's my welcome done. So once again, welcome to the ALPS conference. With that, I'll hand over to Tom West, the CEO of PLS, who's our platinum sponsor, who will introduce our keynote speaker.
Thank you very much, Jamie. So thank you and a very good afternoon and welcome to the first session of the conference and our keynote. Great to be here and a real privilege once again to be platinum sponsor of this year's conference. For those unfamiliar with the role that PLS plays within the industry, we are a not-for-profit collective management organisation owned and directed by you as publishers through your membership of ALPSP, along with 3 other publishing trade associations. And in the broadest sense, our work is about helping publishers to facilitate access to knowledge and information through collective solutions, an aspiration that I know we share with our speaker today, who brings a challenging but I think also optimistic message of what can be achieved through collective action and collaboration. Now, over the next 3 days, we'll be hearing, among many other salient topics, about the opportunities, the risks, the inherent tensions we're witnessing with the rapid march of AI, not least contentions around copyright, and something we at PLS are particularly focused on at the moment. We'll also be hearing about the countdown to Coalition S's deadline of transitioning to fully open access and the impact that this will inevitably have on publishing strategies and also the associated funding challenges. And we'll be hearing about a notable rise in high-quality submissions from India, clearly an example of broader global trends. So I'm delighted, therefore, to introduce a speaker so well qualified to draw many of these strands together in what I'm sure will be a thought-provoking lead into what will follow over the coming days. Our guest today is an assistant professor at the Lincoln Alexander School of Law, part of Toronto Metropolitan University in Canada. He's a designated Queen Elizabeth Scholar and a World Economic Forum expert on human rights. An international lawyer for over a dozen years, he has extensive experience in working in over 40 countries. He's informed the regulatory frameworks and policy formation on AI in several countries, including Brazil, Nigeria, Canada, and the US. Widely published on various subjects, including AI, international law, and human rights, he is also the production editor of the Transnational Human Rights Review. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Jake Okechukwu Afodu.
Thank you so much, Tom, for that very generous introduction. It is such an honor to be here with you. I've been just blown away by the community and the interaction that exists within your association. I must commend you because this is not quite the experience you get in other industries. As someone from the Global South whose research is focused on the impact of tech on those on the margins, being invited to speak here at such a prestigious convening feels very humbling and inspiring. And I think your invitation reflects ALP's commitment to true inclusivity and speaks volumes about your dedication to the future of publishing, which I think is in the Global South. Okay, great. Permit me to rely on the praxis of my indigenous Igbo African culture by extending some kola nuts, although a virtual one, to demonstrate my appreciation for being welcome here. I do not take it for granted, and I'm very much most obliged. When I accepted to deliver this keynote address, the organizers offered a title I could consider, Scholarly Publishing in the era of open access and Gen AI. And they were very clear that this is just merely a suggestion. I was free to tweak it or work it as I could, and I thank them for that kind consideration. But I think they read my mind. So I've chosen to keep the title, not just because it is very clear and practical, as it effectively delineates the themes we are to consider: scholarly publishing, open access, and Gen AI. But also because in its clarity and practicality, it embodies an urgency, and I dare say anxiety, of the present moment. It reads like a telegram message, the type you send a 17th century office assistant to speed down on his bicycle to deliver. Scholarly publishing, stop. Open access, stop. Generative AI, stop. Help, stop. The title works not just because its words make our reality plain, but especially because of the undercurrent of emotions running through under the words. I have chosen to add an unspoken but very present second half, which is: where do we, as publishers, librarians, editors, book promoters, the knowledge keepers and disseminators, where do we go from here? How do we, as learned and professional societies, university presses, and service providers, make sense of the whirlwind as the wave of open access has now been met with a new wave of generative AI sweeping across the scholarly publishing industry? Now, spoiler alert, I don't have the answers. But in proper professorial form, however, what I would do with this keynote is to address some of the tensions resulting from open access initiatives in the way that it claims to democratize access to scholarly publishing, and how this tension is being exacerbated or maybe alleviated by generative AI. So I will present you with some of the thoughts I've gathered quite recently, examining the role of Gen AI and other new technologies in their bid to revolutionize the publishing industry and to revolutionize everything in this entire world, as they claim. I will share aspects of the technology that seem to trouble research integrity, that affect or impact even the extant dwindling funding regime, that affects quality assurance, intellectual property concerns, and the growing inequities when it comes to open access publishing. And despite the complexities of scholarly publishing in this AI era, I want to propose that there is perhaps a silver lining that paves new ways for a more equitable, more sustainable knowledge ecosystem. Perhaps one that requires us to revisit this OA model once again, or maybe to think or rethink about the way we think about AI. Or maybe this is just one of another technology that would just come and go, and you all would still remain. The industry has existed for decades, and there's always something new coming. Or maybe, truly, maybe Gen AI is a different dragon or a different kettle of fish. Like I said, I don't have the answers. But by sharing my modest perspectives as an academic and a researcher, I hope to invite you all to a conversation, to an invitation to the membership of ALPSP to re-examine our dynamic landscape of scholarly publishing and to converge to shape the future of publishing and innovation that makes sense for more people than it does currently. So scholarly publishing, stop. Scholarly publishing has been the backbone of intellectual growth and discovery far before the age of AI, far before the digital age. And this revolutionary technology allowed the knowledge to flow beyond the walls of monasteries and universities, making it accessible to scholars, thinkers, and curious minds across the world. The 17th century saw the birth of the first scientific journals, which marked a pivotal moment. This period formalized the peer review process and created a system for scrutinizing and building upon scientific findings. Now, fast forward to the digital era. What was once limited to university libraries and paid subscriptions became freely available to anyone with an internet connection. This shift catalyzed a knowledge boom, particularly in developing regions like where I come from. However, contrary to what many people think, just allow me to be activist for a minute, scholarly publishing has never been defined by the tools and the technologies that make it possible. Instead, it is an embodiment of a movement, a process that transcends the platforms and the mediums through which knowledge is shared. At its core, scholarly publishing is about the collective endeavor to advance human understanding by sharing, scrutinizing scholarly knowledge through open exchange, rigorous debate, a cumulative process of knowledge authentication dissemination. So yes, tools and technology have made scholarly publishing more efficient, more accessible, more wide-reaching, but they do not define the essence of scholarly publishing. Whether it's a knowledge published in a leather-bound volume or an open-access digital platform, what matters is the intention, the process, the collective aspiration behind it. So this idea of scholarly publishing existed long before the internet, before digital repositories, and even before the printing press. It started as an oral tradition where scholars debated and shared findings through conversations, correspondences, and lectures. And so the technologies that redefine scholarly publishing will continue to evolve, but the core principles of what is scholarly, the exchange of human ideas, the pursuit of human truth, the validation through collective scrutiny, peer review by humans, this will remain timeless. I'm sure you will agree with me on that, right? Okay. I see some nodding. That's good. Well, I want you to remember this cozy feeling of agreement because it might not last very long. But let me also make two more trite statements, if for nothing else, to just get us on the same page. Technology has impacted all aspects of our modern world, not just the publishing industry. Every aspect is on the brink of asking these very important questions. And the second sentiment I hope we can all get behind is the technology of the internet, as well as AI, they are both foundational to open access and to the future of publishing. Yeah. So let me say this. There is a tendency that when questions around technological advancements come up for consideration, people try to reach to one or two extreme sides. On the one hand, we can insist that such developments are just overwhelmingly positive. These are the next frontier in the publishing sector. Human civilization would change forever. We compare them to epoch-making inventions like the electric bulb or the printing press. And so they're celebrating new technology. We tell ourselves to look at this invention, look at this new, shiny new thing, like all other celebrated inventions in history, without looking at the way that such technology might perpetuate society's tendency to maintain or even exacerbate class divide, the digital divide, and of course, the publishing divide. And on the other hand, we might go to the other extreme and decry this development entirely, nervous about the disruption that this technology holds, hoping to secure the comforts that we have built up through the years, and maybe even through generations. On this side of the divide, we forge ourselves into a resistant army. We don't want this technology. We are unwilling to consider it. We are conservative. We've been here for 200 years. Nothing is going to change. Not because we believe in the positive values that conservatism may present, but because we have built our cozy places in the world on the premise that it would not change. So we experience the disruption of technology as a threat that needs to be quashed. Now, the folks on either of this extreme might think they have nothing in common, and in fact that their values are at opposing antithetical ends. But if we look beneath what they express to understand instead what motivates them, we will find a shared instinct towards self-preservation at the expense of others. But I don't imagine any of us here are very extreme. I think most people are more likely like in the middle. You're not more of a very optimistic or very pessimistic. You're more like a pragmatist like I am. So let me end my philosophizing in the abstract and switch to a more practical consideration of how tech interacts with scholarly publishing today. Next is open access, as in open accessibility of and to scholarly knowledge, one of the major interventions of the internet technology. In theory, open access initiatives are altruistic efforts to not only diversify global intellectual production, but to engender an indiscriminate dissemination of the product of that intellectual work. By the end of the 20th century, libraries across the globe were increasingly faced with a problem known as the serials crisis, a phenomenon in which the subscription prices for peer-reviewed journals were rising at such breakneck speed, even their respective inflation rates could not keep up. So to save money, libraries were forced to become much more selective with the journals they subscribed to. But the arrival of the internet brought even more obscure information to our fingertips. So free platforms like PubMed, Biomed, Journal of Medical Internet Research, they began to spring up, representing alternatives to the existing payment-based models of traditional publishing. So yes, the internet allows for the wide dissemination of published materials across far-flung corners of our globe, with the caveat that these places actually have internet connectivity. This caveat is important, and I'll discuss that very soon. The internet allows the global dissemination of scholarly knowledge, and the open access model attempts to bring this possibility to fruition, but it should be clear the distinction I'm making, that things are published on the internet does not mean that those things become without more globally accessible. Disparities in economic and financial realities, both on a domestic and international level, means a differentiation in the ability to scale through paywall restrictions to access materials published on the internet. So the open access model significantly reduces this disparity by eliminating the paywall constraints that militate against the internet's promise of a global accessible knowledge. But now the caveat that I mentioned. While the open access model sells this promise of globalized access, its reach is inherently bound to the availability of several infrastructures. So network availability, internet-enabled devices, and even electricity, very important. Of course, it will be reductive to dismiss the impact of OA as being merely notional. I'm sure there are scholars and research institutions who have benefited greatly from this initiative. I have benefited from the open access initiative very richly. But we must take care not to overstate its reach beyond the context of knowledge transfer and knowledge accessibility. So, if the premise of open access is the recognition of economic and financial barriers to the marketplace of information and knowledge, then this premise must make room for the reality that these barriers also manifest in an inability to access the technology that constitutes the foundational infrastructure for our current model of open access. So we know how this initiative was born in Budapest in 2001, convened by the Open Society, and in February 2002, a small group of scholarly research stakeholders debuted the Budapest Open Access Initiative Declaration. And this declaration, over 7,000 individuals, over 1,500 organizations have signed the declaration. It opens with a stated ambition to create a new public good by merging old traditions in scholarly publishing with the new technology of the internet, which is great. But the premise of open access is an inherent belief that people are willing to do the work of producing knowledge and allowing their work to be widely circulated without any expectation of financial recompense. If you look at the quotes, it's quite small, I don't know if you can read it, but it describes this old tradition of scientists and scholars willing to, quote, publish the fruits of their research in scholarly journals without payment for the sake of inquiry and knowledge, end of quote. Without any doubt, this is a very lofty ideal. The nascent legal historian in me cannot help but point out that this understanding of the motivations that drive knowledge production is at odds with every historical lesson that informs our modern copyright. really, that actually goes against the intellectual property regulatory systems that most of us are aligned to. And we can trace this back to the English Statute of Anne in 1710. The Statute of Anne was born to remedy exploitative practices by printers and members of the Stationers' Company, who routinely published work without due recourse to the authors of the said work. The preamble to this statute emphasized the importance of encouraging learned men, those sexist at the time, to compose and write useful books. To achieve this goal, however, the statute vested property rights in authors. And then publishers would then have to secure the author's permission, usually after paying a fee to reproduce the work. This reasoning from the 18th century legislators in England informs how our modern society continues to handle the product of intellectual labor. So to say it plainly, we have long learned that inventors, writers, scholars are more likely to produce new and importantly good work if they are promised financial recompense for their efforts. And thus, we have the concept of intellectual property, product of our intellectual labor, analogized for good or bad to product of our physical labor. Now, I give this brief historical account so that we can better appreciate the nature of the disruption that open access presents. This disruption, as with most disruptive interventions, is rooted, at the very least, a very theoretically positive aspiration, to live in a world where our curiosity is allowed to roam free from the restrictions of paywalls. Knowledge for the sake of knowledge. Scholars from the global south and scholars in the global north now have an equitable footing. These are the promises that open access sold to us. And we ate it. We ate it. We left no crumbs. And I think this promise makes sense. But this promise was made over 21 years ago. I think if this promise was a human person, they would have probably grown up to become, they'll be in will at the moment and will be proud of who they are, take pictures of them, open access. But as with any college student, now is the time when we're witnessing a new wave to reflect on the investments that shaped this journey, much like discussing student loans after years of education. And after COVID-19, after a global disruption, students were sent home, some schools closed down, some people had to adapt to a new reality of online learning. This shift parallels the introduction of open AI, of generative AI into publishing. So as students had to embrace new technologies to continue their education, the scholarly world now has to integrate or at least consider how AI reshapes open access and also reshapes the future of publishing in this time. So it's time to not just, talk about the achievements of open access and we can keep going on, but to reassess what this means in this AI-driven era. According to reports of the Directory of Open Access Journals, millions of scholars have invested in this vision by publishing their work in open access journals. I have a lot of times. However, several commentators have pointed out our academic communities today are still yearning for the fruits of that investment. In a 2023 study, these authors, which are quite renowned in their field, describe open access to be of noble intent, but a flawed reality. And several factors are responsible for this. The chief of which is that we unfortunately live, and we continue to likely live, in a capitalist system premised on intellectual labor as property to be traded in the marketplace. So the OA model asks that scholars take on the lofty task of producing without any expectation of recompense, but does not seem to account for how sustainable and reliable income is foundational to any ecosystem in these capitalist societies. As an example of this misunderstanding, a core goal that OA sets is the site to eliminate paywalls to access peer-reviewed scholarship. But the reality is that the paywalls are a major source of income for publishing houses, as well as scholars whose work they published, and the publishing team who support the distribution of such work. So if the OA movement succeeds in its goal to demolish paywalls, then on the one hand, smaller and independent publishing houses whose business models must rely on these paywalls, we have to fold under the pressure of a reading public that has now been re-socialized to accept, public good, social research as just public good, free air for anyone to access any day at any time. So as the authors of this study notes, vested interest within the academic publishing sector, particularly publishers of highly esteemed journals, have no incentive to change their funding model since their subscriptions, although costly, are still coming in, and their manuscript subscriptions continue apace far above the publication capacity. So a model that purports to eliminate payments for research without meaningfully accounting for the cost of that research is a model that inevitably reduces the number of vendors that can compete in the marketplace for scholarly publishing. When small and independent publishers are edged out, the power to disseminate knowledge, which is also the power to decide what type of knowledge is disseminated, becomes concentrated in the hands of those who have the capital, those who have the social reputation, and the power to withstand the disruption of open access. And I think it's worth paying attention to the dual strategy of OA. I think the first is self-archiving, where authors deposit their already published work in an open access electronic archive without any payment. And connected to this strategy is the practice of where scholars or their patrons pay a fee to the publishers to secure the open access of their scholarly work, which sometimes can run into thousands and tens of thousands. And for colleagues of mine who work in the Global South, sometimes paying one of those APCs is literally your entire salary for the month. The second strategy recommends the establishment of open access journals to host new scholarship that will be accessible without the impediment of paywalls. The strategies run on the charity of its participants. But charity, especially one that requires the giver to part with valuable property, should ideally flow from those who have more than from those who have less. I must note here that I'm not unaware in many instances that the public already finances a significant measure of scholarly research through public and government sourced grants, but I'm also unaware that for a lot of people don't have access to some of these grants to be able to carry out their work. I, for one, have numerous colleagues in the Global South who still have to self-fund their research projects. And for me, my first 3 research projects as a legal researcher were self-funded. And I remember my friends who were also lawyers, were like colleagues in law school, but they worked in corporate law, thought I was like maybe crazy or jinxed. Like, why would you spend your money, do your research, and then you pay for it to get like what's wrong with you? But I, as a lawyer who wanted to be a human rights lawyer, I found passion in doing my research. I think the first one I did was sampling data within the Nigerian police system to show that the state's legitimization of torture wasn't resulting to valid confessions. And so collecting data over 7 years to actually show the government that, well, by legitimizing torture within the police system, it's not yielding any results, because some people just confess out of pressure, out of inducement or promise. My second self-funded research was a field work I did that troubles the criminalization of sex work in Nigeria, which affected HIV intervention at the time, because when sex work is criminalized still, but it did not give the opportunity for HIV intervention for a community that could not show themselves in the public, so they couldn't come out to receive free medication, free support, even when these were donor-funded and they were available. And my third self-funded research was also a field work that documented the human rights abuses faced by 220 domestic workers, what we call house girls in Nigeria. It's a huge community of people who leave their villages, go to the city, and they work in domestic labor for wages or for the promise of education. And so through my field work, I was able to sort of reflect some of the ways that this practice was yielding a lot of sexual and domestic abuse, and just pretty much bringing it to light. I am proud of my work, even though I couldn't get them published. I'm proud of my work, even though they were self-funded. And I do have recourse to say, well, those were the research projects that I did as a young legal researcher that got me the opportunity to do my master's in the UK for the very first time. And I loved the expression of it. But I keep imagining what else it could be for other people who didn't have the passion or the drive or the support. Sometimes my dad would be like, okay, I know you're struggling, here's transport money. But he's like, why am I giving you transport money to do research that doesn't bring anything back, and you're not even going to get published by any leading journal? Like, what is this for you? Anyways, I digress. Now, I should note here that the open access model is not all bad news. It is adequate, and it does help. certain communities, but it's not perfect because it emphasizes the instinct towards scholarly curiosity and knowledge production that many academics nurture, but it does not acknowledge the practical realities of our global capitalist situation. So I'm not saying open access bad, no. I'm saying open access is good in theory. It is useful to have more and better accessibility to scholarly knowledge. I, from the subaltern, have been a beneficiary to OA, and I can say that with much gratitude. But the problem, however, is the execution of the model, the expectation that those with less financial means should pay the price for open access. True open access should be working out to figure out how do we make knowledge more equitably accessible, even beyond the constraints of internet technology and now generative AI, while still preserving the scholarly output. So I've spent more time talking about open access. Let me move into generative AI. Stop. Now, this new discussion of Gen AI, we all know about it. This is like the Regina George of the time, all eyes on Gen AI. In April 2024, while celebrating their first anniversary, Turnitin revealed that over 22 million student papers in the past year had at least 20% AI content present. Out of the 22 million, 6 million papers had at least 80% AI content present. So I know student activity is not translatable to the publishing industry, but it's important to note the prevalence of this technology. Gen AI uses a process of algorithmic intelligence to offer what I think of as smart correlations, smart predictions, smart guesses when prompted, such that the output produced by the software resembles new human work, but it's not new. AI cannot generate knowledge. It can correlate, it can mix and match, it can regurgitate, but it cannot develop new knowledge, scholarly speaking. Now, on the one hand, open access is foundational to Gen AI projects because the software that run these programs rely on the dataification of scholarly knowledge to provide food for the algorithm. Dataification, in turn, also relies on open and easy access to large swaths of scholarly knowledge to train the machine. In other words, Gen AI relies on open access. So in this sense, Gen AI builds on the exploitation engendered by open access. In an award-winning presentation by my colleague, Laolu Oni, she pointed out that because of Gen AI, human authors today, just like their forebears in the 17th century, run the risk once again to place their work in public of having that work exploited without any recourse to them. Now, recall that I mentioned earlier in our conversation that the stationers were able to commandeer work produced by authors and exploit them for their own purposes. The same perceived injustice of this status quo is resurfacing again. We're seeing a return of the status quo. Several scholars, including myself and other colleagues of the human rights space, have called attention to how algorithmic intelligence has perpetrated and in many instances exacerbated the biases and shortcomings of human-produced data that is used to train the software. I could discuss these concerns for hours about how Gen AI tools perpetrate scientific imperialism, algorithmic discrimination, implicit bias, privacy breaches, and even the negative environmental impacts like massive energy consumptions and excess water usage by some of these systems to cool their data centers. But, that's a different conversation for another day. Let me focus on our conversation here. Now, Gen AI particularly impacts publishing by attempting to take up traditional human roles. Because of Gen AI, fundamental aspects of our industry, like copy editing, text design, cover design, promotional materials, are slowly falling off the expense budget, or maybe they have already fallen. This means that books and other scholarly texts may become cheaper and easier to produce. So there are increasing claims that Gen AI tools can now do citations, conduct peer reviews, perform editorial tasks, and even fact-check bibliographic sources. I have seen Gen AI compared to the disruptive development by the printing press. But while this comparison is not precise, for one thing, printing did not purport to replace human thinking and human cognition. There is some truth to the fact that we can analogize some of the effects of the printing press to this technology today. But printing improved via mechanization the process of making copies of text. And so there was no intervention in terms of the human cost, the job loss, and maybe like something much more broader that we cannot even envision. On the positive front, the lessened costs associated with scholarly publishing mean that lesser resourced publishing houses might have a fighting chance right now in the marketplace. Gen AI can make the processes associated with scholarly publishing to be more manageable, including in terms of the number of people required to run a publishing outfit. Of course, we earn this advantage at the cost of reorganizing the scholarly publishing ecosystem. And by this, I mean integrating Gen AI in the publishing process, which means letting go of some of the humans who traditionally perform these roles taken up by AI. So, Gen AI can cause an upsurge in work being tendered for publishing, but not the quality of the output. I'm sure you've seen, like you mentioned, an upsurge in submissions from several parts of the world. And you can, I think this even creates a lot of work for many of you who have to dig through piles and piles of submissions, most of which you have to eventually reject because they are very poor submissions, because Gen AI allows for very poor output at a very exponential pace. But I think it's helpful to turn to a sister industry, which is literary publishing. In 2023, Verge published a story where editors from a science fiction magazine described being inundated with AI-generated submissions that have poor literary merit and is overwhelming small publishers in recent months, as they quote. So publishers are experiencing an unprecedented increase in queries and submission, which, as the story puts it, can be attributed to pieces that appear to be AI-generated. So right now, there's also a conflation. People are very confused as not knowing what is AI-generated, what is human-generated, and there's just so much blur. It's difficult to process. I should remind you that scholarship is the product that sustains this industry. And if the quality of the product dips, then the health of the market would wane. And I think what makes Gen AI different is that Gen AI is trying to attack the scholarship. And we're already seeing the effect of that. Scary as this sounds, Gen AI, of course, is not all bad. I know I said at the start of this conversation I don't quite have the answers yet, but I can't help but make some suggestions. A useful way to think about using software like this in the publishing industry is to think of it as a tool, as a tedium that is quite necessary to some rote activities within the industry. For example, that comes to me, I as an academic, a writer and a scholar, I would love a Gen AI tool that would do my citations for me. I would not say no to that. So I think we can pick and choose, right, where to use Gen AI. But when I speak to the guys who develop these technologies, what I hear from them is quite different. Some of which are exciting, and I look forward to it. In fact, I look forward to where we can use natural language processing or multimodal AI to transform text to speech. I can go on a website, click on a journal, and probably watch it in a video, probably listen to it in different languages. Those are the kinds of iterations and innovations that we want to see. Not like, how does Gen AI remove 7 people off the work chain and then automate it to another person's benefit, even when the cost is not really in a beneficial way to the industry. So Gen AI can hold positive effect for the publishing industry, but we must guard against outsourcing the creative human decision-making aspects, the tasks that require reasoning and cognition. We cannot allow that to go to software algorithms. The ease and the cheapness that such outsourcing might achieve may come with a non-commensurate diminishing of both the quality of scholarly output as well as the ecosystem of scholarly publishing as a whole. So my contribution to this title is, where do we go from here? And as I noted, I'm unable to offer firm or certain guidance on that question, but I would like to wrap up with 5 short key takeaways. The first is, calm down. Relax, do not panic. This technology is still at its infancy, relatively nascent, still undergoing iterative trials. I think I've worked with topmost and to the ones that are still like very kindergarten level. All of them are still in trials. Trust me. This cannot be compared to centuries of knowledge production that you have fostered. So rather than fearing the panic of its impact, we should view this moment as an exciting opportunity to contribute to the development of this technology. And I must commend ALPS for actually being at the forefront of this conversation. There are industries who are still talking about whether climate change is real or not, but you all are talking about generative AI in scholarly publishing today. So you are early in this discourse, and I think you're on time to decide as an industry if you want to harness Gen AI, where you want to harness Gen AI, and for what purposes. Maybe there should be an ALPS working group on Gen AI or an ALPS industry position on Gen AI that will not only be charting the course for the industry, but also for the tech sector, whom are desperately seeking your licenses, your knowledge, your data, your collaboration. I know some of you are already having side meetings with them, but that's a conversation for another day. Think back to when the internet was predicted to eliminate the need for libraries, or when ebooks were thought to signal the death of print publishing. These technologies transformed, but they did not replace. So Gen AI cannot replace, except we allow it to. Instead, Gen AI offers tools that could streamline the processes and open new pathways for innovation. Tools that may not be as good as the old. Tools that you can scrutinize and decide if you want to use or if you want to embargo. But you have that power. And I think now is your chance to lead the integration of AI in the ways that you would want to see it lead. So you have to take action and not just wait to react. But let me tell you this. I think Gen AI will spark a renewed interest in scholarly publishing within fields like history, anthropology, and subjects that require deep human insight or contextual understanding, which AI perhaps cannot. So members of ALPS who focus on these fields, academic publishers and social sciences, cultural studies, I think this is your time. Because now you have a niche area that AI cannot mess with. So this is your opportunity to shine. So if you have been sidelined by data-heavy disciplines, this is to recenter those scholarly focus in those areas of human insight over machine-generated output. Number two, my father used to tell me every time I said I wanted like a new something, he's like, he who buys the first one buys the old model. Wait till the new models come through. Maybe probably didn't have the money, but it makes sense. You don't want to like rush and get the biggest shiny tool right now while they're still trying it out. You don't even know if it's going to be good. As you navigate this evolving landscape of scholarly publishing, you're going to encounter a lot of pitches and products, a lot of exciting, shiny new things. I encourage you to approach them with a heavy dose of scrutiny because not every AI-driven solution is what claims to be. Some can veer into pseudoscience. I'm not saying they're not great, but of course, asking the right questions and not just assuming that, because I don't know anything about computer science, therefore, let me just leave it to these people. Absolutely not. They need your insight. They need your knowledge. They need your expertise to build the technology. And so sometimes you're buying a product, but you're still doing research for them to improve the product. I'm not saying this to like shit on any industry. I'm saying that there's need for co-production. People you should be speaking with, people who understand the publishing life cycle, who have come to the conference, who understand your needs, therefore they can innovate together collaboratively and not prefer a tool that you need to buy or use. The third is, even when you decide to adopt these Gen AI tools into your publishing life cycle, know the ethical issues that you must consider. So yes, Gen AI tools can streamline content creation, reduce drafting time by 30%, can help with peer reviews and cutting review time by 50%. We have indexing tools that can now be applied to content indexing and search optimization. However, you must know the risks. Biases in output, data privacy issues, cybersecurity issues, vulnerability to breaches. So before deploying an AI tool into your publishing life cycle, what risks should you be aware of? What tools, how would these tools violate your firm's policies? Would they raise intellectual property concerns? Is there an external feedback loop with the developers of this product where you can actually report issues with them, you can flag it, and they can actually correct it? Will your clients, if they are writers or universities or editors, will they need to give informed consent for the use of this tool? What kinds of disclosures are required? Would there be need for watermarking? This is because Gen AI tools generate content that can look as though a scholar produced it, but we all know that maybe it looks like a human expert, but it's not really a human expert. So people within your publishing lifecycle would like to know which specific work was done by a human, which one was done by an AI tool. AI systems also rely on training data that is very difficult to access and assess. So you have to ask the right questions. And I proposed what I call the FASTER principles, which is fairness and equity, ensuring that all people like within the publishing life cycle have the necessary skills, fairly, shared to everyone, accountability, safety and security, transparency, evaluation, robustness, and validity. I can explain way much more with this. But let me use a case that came out of New York, Mata versus Avianca, where a lawyer used ChatGPT, and ChatGPT came up with so many cases, and they took it to court in New York, and the judge fined the lawyer $5,000, even though the lawyer didn't know that these were wrong citations, because they look so real, they sounded so nice. When ChatGPT wants to lie, or when GenAI wants to come up with something, it just looks so true, but it's not. So at my law school, I teach technology law, and in my course, I remind students that with GenAI, you must remind yourself of these 5 or 6 duties which you owe clients and the public, and maybe some of these duties might resonate with you. One is the duty of tech competence. Before you use the technology, ensure you are competent to use it. And so you might also need human independent verification of the output of a GenAI tool. It's very unadvisable to take an output from GenAI and just throw it straight into the public. The second would be the duty of GenAI supervision. So in the United States, for example, as lawyers, our responsibilities regarding non-lawyer assistants now extend to non-lawyer assistants. So if I have a junior colleague who's not a lawyer and they do work for me, if they make a mistake, I bear the brunt. The law assumes you should know better. That's your assistant. The same thing applies right now with Rule 5.1, 5.3 of the American Bar Association rules. When you use an AI tool, that assistant, if it gets it wrong, you got it wrong. Just so you know, with the case of the Mata versus Avianca, even when the lawyer asks ChatGPT, are you sure these cases are real? ChatGPT's like, yes. So you're not even knowing also, that liability falls on you. Again, the law is still shaky and unestablished at this point, but it's also the duty of confidentiality. Never put your client's personal information, name, date of birth, addresses into GenAI tools, because it goes back into this big pool and it comes back again. So these are basic rules you need to know, basic like ethical constructions around the use of GenAI. But let me talk about the fourth point, which is GenAI and copyright. Very important. Oh yeah, just in case Samsung banned their employees from using GenAI tools on their companies, like laptops and computers, because they didn't want that to go into the cloud. But anyways, now, this year alone, authors and copyright owners, including publishing firms, have filed about 40 lawsuits against GenAI developers. Many of them are aspiring class action, so it's a really big deal right now in the law market. At the center of it all is whether GenAI systems, their use of data, whether it can be justified as fair use. So in law, fair use is the legal doctrine that allows a limited use of someone's copyright if you're using it for research, for scholarship, for critique, or for criticism or a comment online. But another issue that lawsuits are looking at is whether GenAI models have memorized copyrighted work. So there's a case, New York Times lawsuit against OpenAI and Microsoft, and they're saying that ChatGPT's models have memorized some of their Time articles. So in law, if you memorize, you reproduce exactly a copyrighted work, then that might be a violation. But if you mix it, mix it somewhere, that might be fair use of some sort. So these lawsuits, big eye, everyone is watching on them. But it's interesting to see how the industry's response to this has been, because when I engage with these developers, many of them, like I was telling you, Tom, they just think about piling up millions and millions of dollars because they know these lawsuits are going to keep coming, as opposed to coming to collaborate with you to see how you can negotiate with some of you in terms of your licensing, sharing agreements, and the rest of that. But I know some of you already may be engaging with them and training some of their AI models with the data, which is good. I mean, raises the question I raised in this keynote address, that if we are to publish for the fruits of our research, for, open access to inquiry and knowledge without getting paid, should the same not apply to you as publishers and licensees when it comes to these GenAI developers? Are you seeing the marks here? So if we are for open access, then we should not complain that Gen AI companies are developing or taking from our licensed and copyrighted works. Maybe we should apply the same openness of knowledge to the generativity of AI models, or maybe this reveals the inadequacy of the current open access regime, which has its gains, but it pushes us to address the main concern, which is the unfair remuneration across the board. Now, for me, very insignificant. I know that some of my articles are already in the pile of the training data set, and I personally have no issue with my work being used for training. I'm already not getting paid anyway, so what can I do? But one colleague said we should all aim for our work to be in that training data, because very soon it will be like you not being on Google, right? So for all practical purposes, you will be invisible if your work is not in that process. So I'm not saying do not, or like what I'm saying is find the bearing that works for you and for these companies and take ownership of this space. Now, with the proliferation of generative AI, people find it very hard to discern what journals to trust, what literature is credible, what content is fabricated or misleading. And I think this growing mistrust offers another pivotal opportunity for the ALPS community. Publishers, editors, learned societies, scholarly institutions can now step up and become authenticators of legitimate knowledge. Because with Gen AI, despite its transformative potential, it has blurred the lines between what is fact, what is fiction, what is human, what is machine. And now, more than ever, the world will look to you, who have done this for years, for decades. You have become trusted knowledge gatekeepers, and you can uphold the integrity of scholarly publishing. Now you can certify and accredit reliable information to champion a gold standard for knowledge dissemination. So I think this is another moment to reinforce your vital role as custodians of credible scholarly publishing. And Gen AI, unplanned, has opened this door for a new era for this community to take responsibility and ensure that scholarship stands pivotal in the sense of all this technological noise. Lastly, we must confront a sobering reality. While we are here in England debating the impact of Gen AI on open access and scholarly publishing, millions of my colleagues in the global south are still battling with access to strong internet connection. According to the International Telecommunications Union, nearly half of the world population remains offline, with over 80% of those living in low-income countries. I must thank ALPS for giving discounts to people who come from lower and low middle-income countries. We want to see more of that. But the AI divide is even starker. Only 4% of AI research output comes from Africa, and less than 1% of all global scientific publications are produced in lower-income countries. So these statistics represent more than a gap. I think this is a chasm where countless of stories, countless of articles, journals remain unpublished. Vital research from those at the margins are begging to be published. Entire communities have yet to benefit from this promise of open access. Not just in terms of the technology, but in terms of having their stories and their innovations and research enter into the global knowledge pool. So with or without technology, even limited access to scholarship remains a critical problem with the industry today. And this is something that I know very intimately. Like many people who come to find themselves in the world of publishing or academia, books were my first love as a kid. I was very shy, always to myself, but I loved books. Unfortunately, I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria. My parents couldn't really afford books, were a luxury, to be honest. And in the school that I went to, we barely had chairs. We sat on the floor. We used the wall as the blackboard. So a library was just, you must be dreaming. But my parents tried. There was like maybe 2 or 3 books in the house. But these were books that were handed over from my elder sister to my older brother. My older brother would use it and give it to my sister. My sister would use it to my brother and my brother. So I was the last. I was the last kid. So it was always worn out. 15 pages are off. Diagrams are... I just desired as a kid to have my one book. I want to have a new book. I want to have a new book. And my parents were like, why do you need a new book? It's the same text. It's the same thing. But I remember how my dream came to reality one time where an NGO from the UK here had donated an old edition book. I think it was a publishing house there was a new edition of the books, and they just shipped their like old edition books back to us. And luckily for us, we were all going to get one book in school. We're going to take home one new book. But I mean, we couldn't decide the topic. Just whatever book you get, take it, run with it, go home. And I got a book. I can't remember the name, but it was about food and nutrition. It was an orange-colored book, and it was new. I peeled off the back myself. And I remember reading that book maybe like 100 times, just in my corner in the world, reading about food and nutrition in the UK. And I would just fantasize about, they talk about hot cross buns. I think in the book they said when kids acted right, their parents bought them hot cross buns. And I was like, yes, I want to eat that hot cross. I don't know what it was, but I wanted it. And he also talked about, strawberries as like berry picking as a tradition. I'd never eaten a berry before. I just wondered, what are those berries like? And I just imagined what strawberry would look like, what it would feel like, what it would like, So fast forward to my master's in the UK. When I came here, I wanted to eat strawberries. Of course, I was disappointed because it was so sour. And I was like, oh. It didn't taste like I'd imagined. But that experience opened me up to the impact of what scholarly publishing can do in the life of a child across the entire world. The first time I heard the word gelatinize or caramelize were from that textbook. And I was like 7 years old. And my friends were like, where did you get that from? And I used them, even when I became a lawyer, I would find myself using like caramelize in court. But my life changed forever. And I say this very honestly, when that publishing company here in the UK donated those old edition books to my school. To say I was excited was the least of it. It did actually encourage me to become a scholar, to become a teacher, and to actually advance myself in this field. So when I first published my first book, and the publishers were like, we could do it in PDF, I was like, absolutely never. I want a physical book. And nothing replaces that. Holding that book, touching that page, flipping it, doing this with it, sniffing it, if it's old or new, just holding the book. There's no technology, no matter how fine, no matter how text-to-speech, no matter how robotic, it cannot give us the same feel or the same impact. So I don't know where the future of scholarly publishing will go. I don't know what the effect of this technology would bring. But the point is, this industry would always be vital beyond any technological innovation, both now and in the future. So for this keynote, I did not pretend to have all the answers, and I don't, frankly. I don't believe there's a single set of answers, but I believe that the solution that we need to have is right here in this room and online, those who are joining us online. But what we must do is to put aside our differences and work together as publishers, librarians, funders, researchers, policymakers to shape and decide how we want Gen AI to serve us, the human entities at the heart of knowledge production, and not the other way around. So I urge you, learned and professional society publishers of ALPS, to stop and use this moment of disruption as an opportunity to re-examine the industry's principles and practices. But don't stop in whatever has worked for you. Don't stop in your commitment to scholarly publishing and to speaking as one voice, irrespective of your differences. After all, a proverb in my culture says, one who dines alone cannot discuss the taste of the food with others. So we need this convening, we need this collaboration, and you have the answers to the questions around the future of scholarly publishing in our world today. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to it.
So I think we have some time, 5 minutes or so, for questions from the floor. So I think there will be microphones coming round. And please do state your name and your organisation when you ask your question. Thank you.
Hi, Heather Staines from Delta Think. Thank you so much for this, and particularly as a historian myself, the promise that potentially fields like history, which are so often kind of overlooked, that this is going to lead to new resurgence in those areas. That's fantastic. And also, the calm down advice was a great advertisement for the musical that's happening later. You touched upon, but didn't specifically call out misinformation. I mean, you touched upon it in a few. And so, in terms of research integrity, we're concerned about what we publish, but also broader misinformation. And I think we can highlight the things that we do as publishers, but how would you, communicate when there's so many different stakeholders involved? And, what kind of advice would you give around, that sort of multi-faceted value proposition?
Right? Okay. Oh, okay. Good. Thanks so much for that. And I think when I made the point about misinformation and disinformation is the fact that people are going to rely on what has existed before this age of Gen AI to accredit what is scholarly. What is scholarly would not be defined by some new journal that come through. It would be defined by what has existed before generative AI. The same way we see with news articles. New media agencies cannot get the credibility that those who have existed before them have. And so I think this is an opportunity. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to decide or to navigate misinformation across an entire life cycle. In fact, what I predict is misinformation and disinformation will become so rampant that we would need like an entire internet, a new one completely, because it's almost impossible to legitimize what is true and what is not, including the platforms, the position. It's just going to be very tricky, right? People will have to find ways to decide like what is legitimate and what is not. And so there's been a lot of talk around like giving a badge or a stamp as to say this is AI generated, or we have looked at this and it is valid. We as an association, we've looked through this research article and it is, we give it that credibility. The same way you have the open access license, something like that is something people have proposed, to be, even though that would also be tricky. The other part is this would then differentiate really strong scholarly knowledge. Right now, a lot of authors would write with a footnote, I use AI to fact check, or I use AI to, people are disclosing, oh, I didn't use AI for this. Even my students will constantly add like a personal story so that they know that, Prof, I didn't use AI for this. But I always would find out students who use AI. AI systems would never produce outputs in a scholarly manner that a lawyer would be required to do. So there's no answer as to how to figure out what is misinformation or disinformation or how to tackle it generally. But you should give people some sort of credibility to show that this is something that is scholarly. And even if AI was used, we've checked it, we've looked at it, it does make sense. The last thing I would say is, I think what is most critical right now is the issue of trust. Trust is literally the currency that navigates the tech and the scholarship world. The technologists need to trust you. You need to trust them as well. But it's difficult to trust the technology that is still in its developmental process. It's difficult to trust the technology that is not transparent, because AI systems they're very black box. So because of that trust gap, it would take a while for people to come around or to have a definite solution as to dealing with misinformation and disinformation.
Have any other? Thank you.
Okay. Hello. Hi, Lori Carlin, also from Delta Think. I promised we didn't coordinate this. So we have a number of clients who are already headlong into discussions with organizations to provide their content to train AI. Some of which it reminded me of your "don't be the first model" comment. And the question becomes, what's the business model here? What should we be doing here? What's the value of the content that we're providing, which is enormous? You talk about the trust. They're also giving their reputation by allowing this content to be used to train these models. And this might be a whole other keynote, so feel free to tell me that, but any advice on looking at those business models and understanding how to value their participation in this process?
The one advice I would give you is talk to your legal team. You need to look a lot around the data sharing agreements, because I've seen a lot of people sign one agreement, and it just moves from one AI company to the next because they have a right to resell, reshare, reuse. So you want to make sure that your license is very much held within good relationship. I advise people to actually ensure you can train, so to use your data, use your experience to train these models, because you ultimately want to benefit from them, right? I would leave you to decide which ones are the very shiny and the ones that are like really doing authentic work. The way that you would know is by how much they know about your industry and how much they know about what your needs are. So if someone is meeting me and saying, I have an AI tool to help you as a researcher, what is it going to help me do? Right? You're having a laugh. Is it going to help me provide citations, verify citations? Absolutely, yes. I want to see that because it takes me time to reference all of that. AI can do that very well. So determining who is credible enough, and then we live in an open AI or open access, I mean, the names are very similar, world. So you also want to ensure that you can benefit from whatever models that you're training. So it should be symbiotic. And don't relent to build together, to co-own the process, as opposed to buying the product, subscribing and non-subscribing. No, we can own it together. So in the legal field, we have like Harvey, Westlaw, Co-Counsel, like companies are developing their own. Nothing stops you from hiring some of these people and developing it within yourself because you're the one with the data, you're the one with the currency, you're the one that they need. Generative AI cannot generate out of the context of what you've published for decades, out of your repository. It cannot. So the last thing I would say is also don't think big. Think about can you develop a tool that helps us navigate the data within a centralized, closed system? I find that AI systems are able to provide more accurate, less erroneous results when it's within a closed data set as opposed to go wide and out on the internet. So look again at those data sharing agreements, ensure that you have a much balanced, equitable stake as opposed to, this will benefit us if you train your AI models with our data sets.
One at the back, on the right-hand side there.
Hi. This on? So I'm Lizzie Brophy, for a publisher at Sage. And I guess I kind of wanted to go back a little bit to, around the misinformation, etc. Because, you mentioned that, it's all about trust, and also open access is about opening up research. And of course, it's very easy for us as publishers and researchers to just think about the research environment, our little closed research environment. But as you said, one of the points of open access is anyone can read it. Anyone can access it. And of course, one of the reasons it's growing is because of the idea of impact. Research needs to have impact. It's no good if it's cited by another big journal. It needs to have real-world impact. And of course, that's when these things coming together can become potentially a bit difficult. Yeah. So I guess, the idea is, what about John Smith on the street, who doesn't really have any of the knowledge around good journals, bad journals, publishers, non-publishers, institutions, etc., but they are looking up information on, cancer, the economy, whatever, and kind of getting some ideas from that. So I'm just wondering, in that kind of wider social impact side, where you think this might be useful. I mean, you said that maybe we need a new internet. Maybe we do. But I was just wondering, for that, beyond the academy, beyond the publisher, what you think the kind of impact and use will be for this stuff.
Impact would also change very massively. I think in the near future, impact would be how many times did someone put in a prompt in a GenAI system and it produced your article? I'm every time someone searches something about cancer, my article comes through, right? That's high because it shows that maybe my work has gone through several training models and therefore it's ranked it quite high. But again, these things could be sort of manipulated. You might do some groundbreaking work and the AI system doesn't really just understand it because maybe it's too complex or whatever. I always say that scholarly publishing has its audience. There's publishing for the academe and there's publishing for the public. And everyone has spaces where that can happen. Not every article or journal publication is meant for public consumption. It might be meant for a specific group of professionals who would take that and run with it. So I'm not very big on like numbers of impressions, how many people downloaded it. It's about the impact that that particular work is doing. Also, research has its time. There are people who published on like monkeypox or COVID decades ago and they got like 5 downloads or 5 citations. And then boom, last year or this year, someone wrote on monkeypox from Uganda and then 700,000 citations. Like, so scholarly research is, in terms of the impact and rankings, we have to rethink how we qualify some of these. But what I would say is, what I liken to what I call the phantom barrier, is that even when there's opportunity for people in the global south to access some opportunity within the scholarly publishing world, we don't know that this exists. We don't know that these platforms can actually even take some of our work. We don't know what services are available, if there's someone that will help us pre-read or help us know about the formatting or whatever. We don't know, except we engage in that regard. So there's a lot of, like I said, lots and lots of research that has not been published yet because no one is bridging that divide. No one is saying, okay, how do we reach out to these people? Who are the people in these parts of the world whose articles might not be as articulate, as sharp, or as qualifying in the way that you want, but they do have value. And I think it's important to think of those ways to make sure people are enjoying from this open access feast, if it is a feast, so to speak. So I think for me, that's where the future of scholarly publishing would go. I think it would require us to go back to the drawing board, writing really impressive articles. It's not going to make a deal anymore because now people are just publishing with AI. Like I can do 20 articles in 2 weeks, publish or perish, which I hate so much. Like, why perish? Like, why not? Like, the word perish triggers me though. Like perish? That's so hard. So I think this impact rankings, this publish or perish mantra, we have to do away with it. And people should be comfortable publishing if it's one thing that is duly researched, very intensive, scholarly, then let's work with that as opposed to just throwing out all kinds of articles without any form of real impact beyond numbers.
We are going to have to wrap up in a second, I'm afraid. We've run over a bit, but it's a really interesting subject, some great questions and answers. Do we have anything from online? No, we're good. So we will wrap up there. Thanks so much, Jake, for a really engaging